Okay, excellent. Yeah, I think that should be perfect.
Okay, I'm gonna get us started then. And I'll throw it over to you really quickly. Let me put myself on the screen with you really quickly, and then I'll take myself off. So we are ready to go. Oh, we have been live talking for a while. It got started. Oh my gosh. You guys have been listening to the behind the scenes talk about what we're doing. That is, so thank you for joining us. And however you want to do those activities that we talked about would be great. So I am here. We're using a new meeting. And so there are some tech issues that we're having with it today, and we apologize for that. But thank you for being with us. It is 1 o'clock. We are going to start the Forests, Wetlands, and Deserts of Zion. And I have the pleasure of introducing Ranger Bridget all the way from the Zion National Park. Ranger, I'm going to hand it over to you, and we can get started for real since they've been listening to us for about 8 minutes now. I love tech. I love tech. I mean,
yeah, technology is great when it works. But hi, everybody. My name is Ranger Bridget. I'm so excited to be here with you today. Again, I'm coming all the way from Zion National Park. This is one of the many, many beautiful views that we have here in this area of southern Utah. So for today, what we're going to be doing, if you have any kinds of questions, we're going to save all of those for the very end. So if there's something you're curious about, I want you to write it down on a piece of paper, or you can even make a mental Post-it note. Just remember it in your head, and then we'll be able to type it into the chat at the very end of the session, and I'll try to get as many of those answered for you as possible. The other thing, I want you all to participate as best you can. So I might ask you to put thumbs up or thumbs down. I might ask you to raise your hand and like shout out answers. I might, ask for some kind of response. Feel free to yell at the screen. Feel free to say anything. We'll try to field any kind of questions that you might put in the chat as well. So that will be awesome and excellent and great for everybody. And I think that's pretty much all I've got for you. So let's get going. Whoop, technology. Okay, awesome sauce. Now this right here, this is a map of the entire United States. I'm talking to you all the way from over here in Southwest Utah. So raise your hand if you've ever heard of Zion National Park before. And then maybe raise your hand if you have been to Zion National Park before. Hopefully there's some people that have heard of us. Hopefully there's even some people who've come and seen us. But you might also notice that there's all kinds of different like green blobs and stars and dots all across the entire United States. So from wherever you're coming from, I want you to think of a national park unit or like park or something that's close by to where you live. So for me, I'm from Indiana. I'm from central Indiana, a town called Indianapolis. And so a park that's kind of close to where I live is Indiana Dunes. So there's a national park at the very tip of Lake Michigan that I can go visit sometimes when I'm home in Indiana. But around you, there's probably some kind of National Park Service unit. Now we have lots of different kinds of things. We don't just have national parks like Zion. We have national seashores on the East Coast and also on the West Coast. We have lake shores like up here in the Great Lakes region. There are historic sites, battlefields, cultural sites. The National Park Service protects all different kinds of places and people and things across the entire country. Now right here, we have our logo. This is the official logo of the National Park Service. You can also see it right here on my uniform. I get to wear the same logo every single day. Now there are 5 components to this logo, 5 different things that we're seeing here that kind of represent the mission of the National Park Service as a whole. So if somebody wants to type in the chat or in the Q&A, one thing that they're noticing about this, there's 5 total that we're trying to keep an eye on. So what are we thinking that we're seeing? Okay, yeah, so there's a big mountain right here. So we've got this massive mountain that represents those geological features that we see across the United States. So we have mountains, but there are also cliffs and canyons and valleys and lots of different really cool rocks and features, not just here in Zion, but all over the place. Somebody else mentioned that there's a tree, and yeah, we've got this great big giant sequoia tree right here on that logo. The giant sequoia tree is not here in Zion. We don't have any of those kinds of trees because they take a lot of water. And as you're about to find out, we don't have a ton of water here in Zion National Park. But there are lots of different kinds of plants that you're going to see as you travel throughout Zion National Park.
Well, And
Awesome.
Ranger Bridget, I just want to say there are some sessions from Sequoia Park today. And so if they want to see that, yeah, they're presenting for us today too. So they might be able to see some of those giant trees. And the last one, so I don't interrupt you again, we used to have bisons in Kansas. And so some of our kids, because of the museums and things like that that we have around our town, that's one of the things that we can connect to on your logo. So that's exciting for our kids.
Yeah, that's great. Well, when you talk to the people from Sequoia, you can tell them that Ranger Bridget is a huge fan of their trees. I love giant sequoia trees. I used to work at Yosemite. We have some giant sequoias there as well, but they're really excellent trees. Here in Zion, we don't have them, but we have lots of other really cool plants. So that giant sequoia kind of represents all the different kinds of plants you might see in a national park. And then, of course, we've got this cute little bison right here. He is so sweet, so small, so adorable. We don't have any bison in Zion either, but we have other kinds of animals. And it sounds like you all have encountered some bison before. You've heard about them, and you've probably seen a lot of other different really cool animals that are native to your area in Kansas. Finally, we've got some water right here. These are talking about all those water features you might see. Again, lake shores, seashores, beaches. There's all kinds of different kinds of water that needs protecting here in the Park Service. And then finally, the last thing to pay attention to is this shape of the logo itself. This is an arrowhead. And the arrowhead is supposed to make us think about all of the cultural history here across the entire United States. I mean, people have been living in this area for thousands of years. And here in Zion specifically, the Southern Paiute have had an impactful and important role in the environment, in the ecosystem, since time immemorial. So in the park, we not only have archaeological sites and historic sites and artifacts from the history of Native people, but we also still have a lot of Southern Paiute folks really involved with how things operate today. And so their impact on the landscape is still really important and really crucial. We also have members of Jesus Christ in the Church of Latter-day Saints who started coming west in the early to mid 1800s, and their history is also represented in Zion National Park. They had a pretty big impact on the environment as well, and many of them are still around today. Their descendants are still here. So this arrowhead is talking about all the cultural history that we protect. Now, like I said, we don't have bison, but we do have these cute little critters. These are California condors. And the California condor is the biggest bird in North America. So their wingspan is about 9.5 feet long, which would be basically 2 of my wingspans right next to each other. That's a really, really big bird. That bird's wingspan is longer than Shaquille O'Neal is tall. So these guys are huge. And in the 1980s, they almost went extinct. We only had 22 California condors left in the wild. But a bunch of people got together and decided, hey, we have to protect these guys. Conservation efforts were started. And today we have between 400 and 500 of these birds in the US. And a couple of them hang out here in Zion National Park in the wintertime. In fact, we have a mated pair. They're in love. And we're hoping, fingers crossed, that they're going to lay an egg here pretty soon. And so we might have a baby condor in Zion Canyon, hopefully. Again, we don't have giant sequoia trees, but we do have some cool desert plants. This is our banana yucca. It looks nice and pokey. It's also got this nice long stalk on the top. That thing will flower every now and then in the springtime, makes a really beautiful display. And then right here is a prickly pear cactus. And you can see it's kind of in the shape of a heart. And that is because we love prickly pear cactus. You also might notice some other cool things about this guy. And we're going to talk a little bit more about our prickly pear in just a couple minutes. Here's some of our cool geological features. This is the Watchman. Watchman Peak is one of the most iconic views in Zion. Now, there are also many others, but this one is my favorite because I live in Watchman neighborhood, right underneath the peak of this mountain. So every morning I look out my window and I wave hi to Watchman Peak. Of course, water is really important. Like we said, this is the Virgin River. And this is a really popular hike in Zion called the Narrows. So you can see there's all kinds of people walking through the waters. The Narrows slices through a slot canyon. So you're walking through the river mostly the entire way. And you've got these 2,000-foot cliffs on either side of you. So you get to watch the way the sun changes throughout the day. And you get to do a really unique and special hike. In fact, this is probably my favorite hike in the entire world. And I've done a lot of hikes. And then finally, of course, we've got a lot of human history, human culture in this area. So this is a painting that was done by Frederick Dellenbaugh, and he published this painting in a magazine. And when people saw it, they were just in awe. They couldn't believe that a place like this was real. And it inspired a lot of people to try to protect Zion. They said, this is special, this is important, we need to do something to preserve it. So in 1909, the Zion Canyon area was designated as Makuntaweep National Monument. Now, Makuntaweep is a Southern Paiute word. It means straight up land. Now, that straight up land is referring to these beautiful, tall, dramatic canyon walls. Now, a couple years after that, they changed it from Makuntaweep National Monument to Zion National Park, which is what we're called today. But the word Makuntaweep still plays a pretty significant role. Look at this dramatic cliff. This is called the Great White Throne. And that altitude change between the top and the bottom creates some really cool and unique environments. And that's what we're going to talk about more today. So everybody raise your hand if you've ever heard the word ecosystem before. Yeah, hopefully lots of people have their hands raised. Now, what is an ecosystem? Let's think about these two words. First, we have, or not these two words, these one words, but we can break it up into two. So here we have the word eco. And when I think of eco, we think of like eco-friendly or like eco, something naturey, something outdoorsy, something environmental. But then there's this word system, which refers more to like the structure or the organization. So when you put those two words together, when you smush them into one, you created a word that means something about outside and something about systems, organizations, and structures outside. So that's what we're going to be thinking of. But can anybody type into the chat or shout out one kind of ecosystem that is in the area where they live? What kind of ecosystems do you see around you? Yeah, so maybe you're in like a lake ecosystem. Maybe you're near some kind of body of water, a river, a wetland environment. Yeah, you might also be in like a forested ecosystem. You might have lots of different kinds of trees. Kansas is the Great Plains-ish region, right? So you might have some like prairie ecosystems as well. Yeah, so those are all different kinds of ecosystems you might encounter in your life. But here in Zion, we have three main ones. We have forests, we have wetlands, and we have deserts. So that's what we'll be focusing on today. But first things first, I want you all to make some observations. Scientists are all about observing the world around them. And that's also part of my job as a ranger, is to pay attention to the world around me and try to figure out what's going on outside. So I want you all to take a couple of seconds and really look at this painting right here. So this is a foresty ecosystem. There's a lot of plants and animals in this ecosystem. I want you all to take a couple seconds and find one animal and then describe to someone nearby what that animal is doing. Like, how is it interacting with the ecosystem that it's living in? What is its relationship to that ecosystem? So again, look at this for a couple seconds and then share with somebody nearby what you're noticing about this painting. I'll give you a little bit of time. All righty. Hopefully everyone got a chance to make an observation and share it with a friend. I want to talk about one of my favorite sections of this painting. There's this woodpecker guy right here, and he is boring a hole into a tree stump, which is pretty cool. It's pretty interesting because this woodpecker, he has some special adaptations or features on his body that allow him to drill holes into these trees, which grow abundantly in this forest, so that he can find shelter, so that he can find food. So this woodpecker and this tree have a special kind of relationship. And that's what we're going to talk about next. We're talking about relationships in an environment. Now, within an ecosystem, you can have a lot of different kinds of relationships, but the one we're talking about today is called symbiotic. Can everybody say that word with me? Can you all say symbiotic? Yeah, symbiotic relationships are really, really cool. That's a relationship between two species where one of those species benefits. At least one of them is doing well. Now, there's 3 categories of a symbiotic relationship. That first category is called mutualistic, and that means that both of those species in the relationship are benefiting. They are having a great time. Nobody is being harmed. Everyone is being helped. The second kind is called commensal, and that is where one species is doing great, totally benefiting, and the other species is like fine, like nothing good is happening to them, but nothing bad is happening to them. So it's just like neutral. And then finally, we have a parasitic relationship, and that is where one species is benefiting and the other species is being harmed. It's being hurt by that relationship. So those are the 3 things we're talking about in the 3 major ecosystems of Zion, which, as I said, here at the top on that plateau, that's going to be our forest ecosystem. Here at the bottom of the canyon is where we're going to find our desert ecosystem. And then along the Virgin River that I mentioned earlier is where we'll see our wetland ecosystem. So let's dive right in. Let's talk a little bit more about how cool these ecosystems are in Zion and how you might be able to see similar things happening in your community, in the place where you live as well. So first things first, welcome to the desert. Now, has anybody ever been to the desert? Raise your hand. Have you been to the desert before? All right, shout out something that describes the desert. What is a desert like? Yeah, it's probably really hot.
Like dry.
Dry, yeah, it's probably super dry.
I always think of sand with the desert. I don't know if that's because the movies always have us with a lot of sand and desert, but I don't know if that's accurate, but that's coming through. We have some more coming through. Buggy.
Buggy, okay.
Yeah, maybe that's part of it. And then cactus, like I think they're thinking of cactus when they think of desert too. So those are all the suggestions coming through, Ranger Bridget.
Awesome, thank you so much. Yeah, you all nailed it on the head. Deserts can be really sandy. They're definitely super hot. They definitely have some really specific plants that are adapted to that ecosystem that help, that means that they're like extra strong, extra hardy, able to survive. So our desert here, it gets only about less than 15 inches of precipitation every single year. So we don't get a lot of rain and we don't get a lot of snow. It's pretty dry. It also gets really hot, especially between May and October, where it can get to temperatures of like 115, 120 degrees Fahrenheit. So really toasty and really dry heat. So y'all are in Kansas, it's probably pretty humid there. Here in Zion, it's not really humid. It's just dry and your skin really can feel it. So really hot, really dry. And these plants and animals, as I said, they have to be extra strong to be able to survive in an environment where they can't get a lot of water. So,
well, and they're also wondering if it's busier at night than the day because of those things that you mentioned. So I don't know what they like. Actually, do the animals come out, the bugs come out? Maybe it's busier at night in the desert because of those things you mentioned, super hot, super dry. How do you access those things? So I thought that was a great observation of thinking of deserts.
That is, yeah, excellent job. Kudos to whoever thought of that one. But yeah, we do see a lot more activity at night. There's a lot of really cool nocturnal animals and plants that are really well adapted to the night versus the daytime, including, technology's being weird, including this guy right here. So this is our prickly pear cactus. I remember we all saw him earlier, but he's got some pretty cool and unique adaptations. What's one observation that we could maybe make about this prickly pear cactus?
Well, I want to say Ryan in Mrs. Klein's class from Harry Street said there might be a lot of bushes and specifically like spiky is a good word, maybe thorny. I like spiky.
Yeah, spiky is a great word to describe these guys. So these spikes right here are called spines. They are part of what these prickly pear cacti use to protect themselves from predators. So from other animals that might try to eat them, not even predators. For any animal that might try to eat this prickly pear, it's going to have a hard time doing that because of all those spikes. It's going to poke them. If anyone's ever touched a cactus before, they know for a fact that it doesn't always feel super pleasant. So that's a great observation to make. There's also some other cool adaptations here for these guys. Inside of our prickly pear, there's this kind of pipe-like structure. It's almost like a sponge. When a sponge is dry, it's kind of small and hard. But if you pour water on it, it'll sort of inflate. It'll soak up all of that water. Our cacti kind of do the same thing. They soak up all that water, they keep them in those pipes, nice and safe inside of these paddles that they have on the rest of their structures. Yeah.
Well, in Ranger Bridget, does the heart shape, is that an adaptation or is that just kind of an aesthetic thing? They noticed that it was heart shaped, but didn't know if that was part, because the spikes are an adaptation that it made, right? And then how it stores water is the adaptation, but they were wondering if the heart shape was also an adaptation or if that was just the way it looks.
Yeah, that's a great question. The heart shape was just the picture that we chose. Some of them do kind of look like hearts, but for the most part, there's sort of this wide, like ping pong paddle shape. It just kind of varies from plant to plant, but that's a good idea. I like to see that you're paying attention and making observations and thinking about what those observations might mean about the plant. You're going to be excellent scientists and excellent rangers by the end of this program. Yeah, so their paddles, the shape of their structures, the interior, all contribute to these cacti being able to store a lot of water. So they can soak up water, they can keep it nice and safe inside of them. They also have a pretty shallow root system, which means it's pretty close to the surface of the soil. So if it rains, which again, it doesn't do often, but it can happen. So if it rains, the water doesn't have to seep down deep into the soil. The prickly pear roots are right there at the surface and they're able to grab as much water as possible and store it inside of their bodies. Next up, we talked about the spiky spines. Those are actually modified leaves. So if you think about like a maple tree with that big hand-shaped leaf, it's got a lot of what's called surface area. So there's a lot of space on this leaf for the sun to shine on, which means the sun is going to evaporate moisture off of this leaf. Kind of like how when we sweat, the sun can kind of evaporate the moisture off of our bodies, and that's what cools us off. That's how it happens to leaves as well. But these spines, they're smaller, they're harder, they're pokier. And that means that water can't escape from those leaves because they don't have the same kind of setup and makeup as like a traditional leaf you might see on a bush or a tree. And then finally, this connects all the way back to when you were talking about nighttime versus daytime in the desert. But our prickly pear have stomata. Now, a stomata is kind of like a pore. So if you've ever like looked really closely at your face in the mirror and you've seen all those little tiny dots all over your skin, those are your pores. And that's how we sweat. The sweat comes out of those pores and helps cool us off in a breeze. Well, these guys have kind of the same thing going on, but their stomata can open and close. So during the daytime, they close up their stomata really, really tight so that they can't release that moisture inside of them into the hot air around them. But then at nighttime, the sun goes down and it cools off a lot. And so then they open their stomata, and that's when they do this exchange where they take in carbon dioxide and release water and H2O into the air around, or water and oxygen, sorry, into the air around them. So these stomata are a pretty special and important adaptation. That goes back to the night versus day thing that you all were thinking about. So great work, everybody. Now, next up, we've got this guy right here. Look at him and his cute little head and his cute little shell. This is our desert tortoise. Now, somebody shout out, what's one observation that we can make about this tortoise? What's one thing that we're noticing about this guy right here?
There's always it looks pretty big in your picture, and our turtles around here aren't that big. So maybe the size is something that's coming through. And then of course the giant shell on the back. But also, oh, I see like broad feet that like their toes, they notice, and they're wondering if that has to do with the ecosystem's ground, because people are saying it might be rocky in deserts as well. And so they're noticing the feet of the tortoise. Does that help with the rocky situation, or the temperature is what is coming through? And they also know it's a little dirty.
He is. This desert tortoise spends a lot of time rummaging around in the dirt. He's got this nice shell. He's got these beautiful little claws. And you all were great about noticing those claws because they don't use them like a bobcat or a mountain lion uses claws. They're not hunting with those claws. They're digging with those claws. So what they'll do is they'll dig themselves a burrow, kind of like this one right here, into the ground. And these guys are huge homebodies. They don't like to leave their house. And so they will spend 95% of their lifetime inside of their burrow, hiding out during the daytime, trying to stay out of the sun, trying not to lose any moisture, trying to stay nice and cool. Kind of like how when it gets hot at home, you're like, "Oh, I'm gonna go inside. I can't be outside anymore. It's too hot. I don't want to be here. I'm uncomfortable. I need water." These guys are kind of the same way.
Bridget, Ranger Bridget, they also notice, and you might come up with this, they notice the color of it is also the color of the desert that's around it. So they're saying maybe it blends in with the environment.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the color of the desert is kind of this brown, sandy, beige, tan situation. And these guys are also brown and sandy and beige and tan as well. Makes them harder to find because with a shell that big, you're not going to move very fast. You're not going to be able to run away from a predator. But if the predator doesn't even know you're there, you're probably going to be okay. You'll be able to avoid any kind of animal that might want to eat you. So that is an excellent observation. And these guys for sure use that camouflage to blend in with their environment to stay nice and safe. So great work, everybody. They also have really thick skin. Speaking of color, their skin is thick and it is colored the same as its environment around it. That helps keep them from getting damaged by the sun. You think about, you go outside and you stay outside too long in the sun and you get sunburned. And that's not super pleasant. And it can get really, really bad. Well, these guys, they don't have as much of that problem because they've got this protective shell and this thick protective skin to keep them from getting harmed by the sun. They also do this cool thing where they can recycle their urine. So instead of peeing out all of the water in their body, they can separate the water from the stuff, the waste that they're trying to get rid of. And then they can circulate the water inside of their body and retain it inside of them for a long, long time, like weeks and weeks and weeks at a time, which is pretty cool and a pretty unique adaptation for animals in the desert.
Ranger Bridget, people were wondering, well, they noticed that you had the recycle urine before you spoke, so we had a few oohs, but then you explained it, and it's not as, it's more like a filtering system that they do with it. So they filter out the bad stuff and keep the good stuff. But there's also a question, how do they keep themselves safe? Because maybe when they think of deserts, they also thought of sandstorms, or because it's so dry, if there's dirt, because here in Kansas, it gets pretty dry too, and windy. So we get a lot of dirt flowing around. How do they protect themselves or from that environment? Do some of their adaptations help with that?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question. So one of their adaptations that's a pretty big deal is that big shell. So if there's going to be a huge sandstorm, if it's super windy, if it's really bad out and there's tumbleweed everywhere, they're going to be able to retreat inside of that shell and hide out and try to stay safe from those conditions. But more often than not, they're going to be home inside their burrow during those kinds of conditions. So they're not going to leave too often. They're going to stay inside as much as possible to avoid some of those bad situations. But again, their thick skin helps protect them. Their shell helps protect them. And those claws for digging create homes and shelters that they can use as a way to protect themselves from those dry or sandy or stormy conditions. But yeah.
So do they have predators? Do they have predators? Do they have predators? Or are they at the top of the food chain in where they live in the desert?
Yeah. So they do have predators. We have mountain lions and coyotes and bobcats in this area. So, if any of them could find a desert tortoise that they thought they could eat, they would probably try. But again, it kind of just depends on who's around and if they think that this guy is an easy target.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so now I need everybody to put on their ranger hats. We need to put on our ranger thinking caps, and we're going to try to figure out the relationship that these two creatures have with each other. So over here, we have our prickly pear, and it's got these beautiful pear fruits on it. So these prickly pear fruits are full of prickly pear seeds. Now our desert tortoise right here, he loves prickly pear. He loves it for dinner. So he's going to come up, he's going to eat these fruits, and he's going to digest all of the good stuff, get all the nutrients out of it, but he can't digest the seeds inside the prickly pear. So what's going to happen is he's going to walk somewhere, and a little bit later, he's going to have to use the bathroom, and he's going to poop out the seeds for the prickly pear in a different location, which means the prickly pear is going to be able to grow more prickly pear because its seeds were distributed by the desert tortoise. So with that kind of thing in mind, do we think that both of those species are benefiting, that this is mutualistic? Do we think one species is benefiting and one is kind of neutral? Or do we think one species is benefiting and one is being harmed? Put up your thumbs. Mutualistic, commensal, or parasitic. Okay, has everyone gotten a chance to do a thumbs situation? All right, well, drum roll, please. The answer is mutualistic. So if you gave me 2 thumbs up, you were absolutely correct. These 2 creatures both benefit from the situation because he gets dinner and this prickly pear is able to grow more prickly pear because its seeds were dispersed by our desert tortoise. So that's one of the cool ways that these 2 species interact in a desert environment. But we don't just have deserts here in Zion. We also have wetlands. These are called riparian environments. And remember that virgin river I was talking about? Remember the hike, the Narrows? That virgin river plays a huge role in the biodiversity of Zion. So you can see in this picture, there's so many trees, there's so much green, there's a lot of things going on here. And that's because this soil floods pretty regularly. So the soil around the river has a lot of nutrients in it, has a lot of water in it. It supports life really, really well. That also means that more animals are going to live here because there's more things to eat, there's water to drink. We're going to see some different kind of critters moving around this area because they have so many food options. And then we have all different kinds of wetland environments here. Not only is there the river bank, but there are marshes and ponds and areas around seeps and springs. We even have a swamp here in Zion, which is kind of wild because, again, we don't get that much precipitation, but we do have kind of a lot of water, which is a pretty cool thing. All right, right here is our beautiful, tall, lovely cottonwood tree. What's one observation we can make about this cottonwood tree? What are we seeing and noticing?
Well, I see one main branch. One of our sessions earlier talked about the difference between, they were all about the tremendous trees. And so we learned about that from the from our rangers friends in the Smoky Mountain Ranger and National Park. And so one main stem is something that I now notice on trees.
That's amazing. Yeah, that's awesome. So we've got this main like trunk and we've got all these branches. We've got these beautiful leaves. And those leaves are actually part of one of the ways, the strategies that they use to accumulate water. So you can see right down here, this big tree has so much shade. And when it's hot outside and you can't go inside, you're like, oh, well, the next best thing is going into the shade of a tree. You get out of the sun, it's a little cooler. And both of those things mean that the ground underneath this tree is going to have a little bit more moisture in it because it's not sunny. The water's not just evaporating off the ground like it is in this area over here. It's a little cooler. It's a little shadier. There's going to be more water there for those roots to collect and store inside of this tree. So those leaves are really important for the tree to be able to get water. These cottonwood trees also do something really, really cool for reproduction. So not only do they have the like tufts of cotton with the seed pods in it that blow in the wind and give people allergies and plant seeds around Zion National Park, but they also do this thing called vegetative regeneration, which is a really big vocab word that you don't have to remember. But vegetative regeneration means that if there's a stump or a branch or something that breaks on the cottonwood tree, it can actually grow a new branch from the stump that's already there. So it has a couple of different strategies to survive in its environment, which is pretty neat.
Well, okay, and I want to point out, somebody said the cottonwood tree is actually our state tree, I believe.
Oh, no kidding. Okay,
I think so.
Really familiar with these guys. That's awesome. Yeah, so these trees really special, and you find them all over the place. You find them in my hometown, in your hometown, and even here in Zion, which is pretty neat. All right, next up, everybody shout it out. Who is this right here? This is our beaver. Yeah, so these beavers we have here throughout the Zion National Park. And then what's one thing that we're noticing and observing about this beaver right over here? What's he doing? What's he up to? What's he look like?
He looks wet, but not soaked. So lives in the wetland part of Zion, maybe, because he looks pretty wet and pretty comfortable in the water versus just getting a drink.
Right, exactly. Yeah, he's got special fur that helps insulate him or protect them from really cold conditions. And it also keeps them from like getting sick and stuff like that. So the fur is really important. They also have this cute little tail, and he's chewing on something over here. So pay attention to that. I wonder what he's chewing on and why. So typically when we think of beavers, we think of beaver dams, right? They build these great big mounds out of wood and mud, and they pack it all in together and they make a dam. But here in Zion, we get a lot of flash floods. Yeah, so it rains so much that the Virgin River floods. It creates all of this debris and it destroys the beavers' hopes and dreams. They just get washed down the river, which is not great if you're trying to build a dam and then you have to keep rebuilding your home over and over and over again because we get so many flash floods. So our beavers got smart. They're really, really clever beavers. And so instead of building a dam in the middle of the water, what they decided to do was build it in the riverbank. So if you see a little hole like this in a Zion riverbank, that means there might be a beaver living in there because they don't want to have to rebuild their house every single time it rains, every single time the Virgin River floods, which is pretty regularly. So they built their dams or their lodges in the side of the riverbank where it's nice and safe and they can just wait out the storm and wait till the river waters go back down. So they're really smart beavers. They have this good long flat tail that they use to swim, that they use to build their lodges, and they also communicate with it. They'll smack that fin on or their tail on the water surface. It makes a loud sound and it warns other beavers in the area, hey, there's danger. There's a predator here. It's going to try and eat me. They also have these really cool teeth. Their teeth are kind of like our fingernails. Their teeth never stop growing. Now, when our fingernails get too long, right, we trim them or we file them or we go to the nail salon. But there's no teeth nail salon for beavers. So they have a different strategy to make sure that their teeth don't get too overgrown and cause problems. And what they like to do is they like to chew on trees. So even though the beavers here in Zion don't necessarily use the tree materials to build dams, they're still going to be chewing on those cottonwood trees because one, it helps their teeth stay nice and filed down, and two, they need the nutrients from the bark of that tree to help them survive. That's part of their diet in the national park. So beaver teeth are really special and important. Now put your ranger thinking caps back on. We're going to think about the relationship between these two guys. So this beaver right here, he needs the nutrients from the cottonwood tree, and sometimes in places that aren't Zion, he needs the tree as a building material. But this cottonwood tree, you know, it's being chewed on. It probably doesn't like that a whole lot, but it does have vegetative regeneration properties. So it could continue to survive after this beaver chews on it. So based on that information, give me your thumbs up. Is it mutualistic? Is it commensal? Or is it parasitic? Give you a second or two to ponder, think about it. All right, if you said it was commensal, you're correct. So the beaver is definitely benefiting from this relationship. And the cottonwood tree is kind of neutral. It's not really benefiting, but it's not really being hurt that bad. It doesn't kill the tree when the beaver chews on it. So these guys have a commensal relationship, which is pretty neat.
Ranger Bridget, I just wanted to say we have about just 2 more minutes.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah.
All righty, then we will speed through the forests of Zion here real quick. These, we get a lot more precipitation up here, about 20 to 30 inches. There's mixed conifer trees. It's an elevation of 6,000 to 7,500 feet. So the climate is really different up here. And that means that we have some different kinds of trees. This is our ponderosa pine. They get really tall and they have these cool roots. So they have a deep tap root that can pull water from deep below the ground. Then they have more shallow roots like our prickly pear that can get the water that falls on the plateau, that falls from the sky, and they can collect that really quickly. They also have really special thick bark. So this bark is adapted for fires. We get wildfires pretty regularly here, and so this bark is thick enough to protect them in a wildfire situation. Then we have our western bark beetle right here. This guy is currently like chewing a hole in the bark. Now he has this really thick exoskeleton and these antennae we're moving around. He's got really strong mandibles or jaws so that he can chew on things really, really well. He's also super small and he uses pheromones to communicate with other bark beetles that are around him. So pheromones are kind of like a scent, but it's so dark in those tunnels inside the bark that they can't see very well, so they use pheromones to tell each other what's going on. Now these bark beetles will make all of these cool tunnels inside of the tree. So they make these tree tunnels. They're chewing on the bark. They live in here, and they also get nutrients from the ponderosa pine tree. But the ponderosa pine tree, if there's too many tunnels in its bark, it's gonna die. So it actually can kill these ponderosa pines if the bark beetles have chewed up too much of the interior. So based off of that information, this is going to be a parasitic relationship because these western bark beetles are benefiting a ton, but our ponderosa pine trees are not doing so well. They are being harmed. They are dying because of this relationship, the symbiotic relationship. All right. Now we've learned a lot today. We've learned about forests and deserts and wetlands, so many interesting and exciting things. And if any of you guys want to take what you've learned today, you can do your own activity called Create a Critter. And you can find the link for that in the email or on the website that you were sent. And you can learn a little bit more about creating your own kind of creature that's adapted to an environment.
Yeah, just make sure it adapts to the ecosystem that you want. And she shared with us 3 ecosystems. What an amazing sharing about your wonderful national park. I hope to make it out there someday, Ranger Bridget. And thank you so much for giving this learning opportunity for our students too on this Every Kid Can Visit a National Park Day that we do for our district.
Yeah, that's awesome. So nice to meet you. Have a great rest of your day.
You
And
too.
enjoy the rest of the program.
Thank you so much again. Bye-bye.
Bye.